Gina, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Hi, sorry. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the European RICS World Built Environment Forum webinar on happy buildings, happy people, delivering solutions for building performance optimization. Today's webinar is brought to you in cooperation with our lead tech partner, ASI. My name is Gina Ding, and for today's webinar, we will be looking at how the industry is taking a broader approach to decision making in the way property is used and managed, and explore innovative solutions driving change in the built environment, moving from a building to a people-centric approach. So before we start, a few practicalities for our audience who are listening in from over 29 countries. So you will have noticed that your microphones are muted. If you have a question, so please type it in the question box which you should see on your screen. Try to keep your question short and where possible, indicate who you are asking the question to. So time permitting, I will do my best to address them with the panel. I do apologize upfront if we do not have time for all the questions. If we do not have time, we will record your questions and will aspire to answer them after the webinar through the WebF website. And finally, a summary article and recording will be available on the rics.org/WBEF next week. And you should receive information in your inbox about when that has happened. So our excellent panel today will talk about the changing role of real estate and its impact on asset and performance management, the role of data, sustainability, ESG, and gives us an insight on what are the solutions. So before I hand the virtual floor to them, I would like to spend a few minutes on setting the scene. So for many years now, stakeholders from businesses to policy decision makers have started to recognize that the quality of our built environment impacts strongly about on how we feel, the way we behave, and even our susceptibility to health risks. The pandemic has dramatically accelerated many of the conversations on the role and value of buildings that we have been having for many years. The discussion is not new, but as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, the scale of the challenge is unprecedented. There will inevitably be major economic consequences which will impact the demand for and the use of property across all sectors. So the infographic that you see demonstrates the link between the economic, business, technological, social, and environmental drivers of change and their implications for real estate. And it is by making these links between what is happening in our customers' world, which are the drivers, and the implication for real estate that we can ensure that we remain relevant. Changing corporate structures, the need for flexibility, and the need to attract and retain skilled people will alter the demand for space. The new model of workplaces today is such that they are much more tech enabled, so that to be less fixed and more agile, organized, so much more team-based and collaborative work, planned and curated to enhance experience. Alongside this, the health and well-being movement has gained tremendous traction in recent years. On a macro level, the Oxford Foundation for Knowledge and Change considers some of the different ways that well-being is being measured and look at how those measurements are being used in practice to help shape policy in different countries. So if we take it down to real estate level, there is a paradigm shift of occupiers' mindset and a greater awareness of working environment connected to well-being. Acceleration of ESG considerations means that there is a greater need to minimize environmental impact while maximizing the optimization of building performance. Today, there is a wealth of existing sustainable well-being indexes out there, ranging from the Sustainable Development Goals Index, the Human Sustainable Development Index, to the Happy Planet Index. If we take the Happy Planet Index as an example, it was originally defined as the ratio of happiness and ecological footprint. Now, this can be translated at building levels when we look at maximizing occupier experience while reducing environmental impact. So it is without a doubt that we need new innovative approaches to the design, delivery, occupation, and management of real estate. The built environment profession itself must evolve, and this applies to all building, be it for working, living, shopping, enriching, relaxing, learning, or healing. Social and human capital has been identified in the OECD well-being framework as key dimension of resources for future well-being. People are becoming more important than ever as drivers of real estate decisions. At the same time, discussions abound of the need to optimize human capital and user experience has been identified as one part of the overall strategy. So which brings us today to our excellent panel, which I will now introduce. And I would like to invite all of them to quickly say hi so that next to the introduction, we know that the connection is working. First of all, we have Paul Beggars, who is RICS Head of Property Standards. Paul is also leading on the International Building Operations Standard, also known as IBOS, which serves as the inspiration for today's panel discussion. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Gina. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Looking forward to the next hour.
Secondly, we have Eric Enstrand, CEO of Safe Asset Group, which is an independent and internationally acknowledged certification program for operational risk, resilience, and governance of real estate operations. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Gina. Looking forward to good dialogues with my colleagues here in the panel.
Next up, we have Richard Lesueur, Director of Portfolio for the EMEA region for Building Institute, which is the leading global movement to transform health and well-being with its people-first approach to buildings, organization, and communities. And they are doing this using the well-building standards. So welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Gina. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the discussion, everyone.
And finally, last but not least, Tobias Struck. Tobias leads the product management of the corporate real estate management solution from building minds, from the vision to the implementation in the platform. Tobias is also a member of the executive board from the International Building Performance and Data Initiative. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you, Gina, and good afternoon to everyone. And yeah, thanks for having me today. Looking forward to the conversation.
So we're going to look now at the first segment where we talk about the changing role of real estate and its impact on asset performance management. So performance of buildings and property has been questioned for some time as across the property ecosystem, asset, property, and facility managers all look to demonstrate performance and the value of the asset. So performance measurement has traditionally been recorded within those silos. So I have a question first for Richard. So what might be the impact of performance and value of the asset be because of the effect of the pandemic and the need to be prepared for future crisis situations?
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, it's a great question, this. We're seeing that occupiers are requiring, or rather actually demanding, a better environment for their health and their well-being, and seeing very acutely this within the commercial real estate and the office space. And we're seeing the question that's being asked is, what are my employers doing about my health? And I think this is right to be asked because health correlates directly to the bottom line, as we're witnessing. Creating the right environment to get employees back, to increase their productivity, to decrease absenteeism, increase retention, it is very much front of leadership's minds. So it's not just about the ergonomics, be it a standing desk, better nutrition needs to be available, making sure the quality of water is up to the space that needs to be, and access to fitness. And equally, lighting, matching your circadian rhythm is important to productivity. Essentially, we're seeing that we've been able to measure the environment above and beyond health and safety as a sort of compliance. But that said, I'll quickly just say that we have seen with the World Health Safety Rating, which came out on the back of the pandemic, specifically to deal with these demands, that in the last 18 months, about 1.5 billion square feet globally has been taken up by people taking on this rating. And that's really to give people the confidence to get back into the spaces, knowing that measures have been undertaken by their leadership. I mean, ultimately, I think as a final point, we'd love to see health being measured as part of the valuation of an asset.
That's true, Richard. Thank you. So sort of moving on to Eric. So based on your experience on risk and resilience management, And in light of the various change factors which have impact on the role of real estate, as well as the impact from the pandemic itself, has the indicators for risk assessment changed? And sort of another question. So how do property management professionals look into risk management and the building of resilience into their asset portfolio?
Well, that's a good question, Gina. So again, it's not easy, but what we see now in really the past 2 years now is the risk landscape around us is changing quite rapidly. You know, pandemic hitting us, and then other uncertainties across Europe, also close to borders in Europe, making the uncertainty. So really, when you have this volatility and uncertainty, you need to manage the risk. So I really see for asset performance and real estate that risk management is a real value driver for the performance and used in the decision-making process to set priority and understand the different risks. And as Richard said, that could be health and safety, that could be well-being, and it's becoming quite a vital part of operations to manage your property and people risks. And indicators have changed when to conduct a risk assessment because of quick changes in technology, the volatility around us. All of this needs us to make continuous assessments of the risk and the performance in our assets. It's not a static one-time off you do on a top level once a year. It's really down to each individual asset and each individual management team to assess these risks and manage the risk. It needs to deliver value to the operation. And also the good part when you work with risk management in a structured, systematic way is it breaks down the silos, because you really have to understand the full operations across the organization and cross the operations to manage those risks. So risk management is enabling business, and it's really a success factor for organizations today that understand the operational risk, and it's also used to build up the resilience against those risks you have in your operation. So if you understand and work with risk management actively, it will bring a value to your operations and to your decision-making process.
Thank you, Eric. That's a very interesting insight, actually. So Paul, sort of following up from what Richard and Eric was saying, so with the changing nature of the profession, so given what they've also explained as a background, organization are asking different questions as opposed to how they used to operate, and there is also this talk about the need to adapt and evolve with new skills. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on this point?
Thanks, Gina. And yeah, really interesting question. And I mean, I think I'm here to talk about the role of the profession and how does the profession remain relevant in the face of some real challenges. And it's a huge opportunity for the profession. And if you look at the panel today, if we'd have run this session 5 years ago, would this have been the panel talking with data experts and well-being? And it's a different approach to industry, and it's a different approach to the professionals. But the key is there is so much expectation on buildings now in terms of awareness and understanding of how buildings can be used and add value, create value for an organization. And in order to deliver and develop that, we need professionals to do that. That's the critical piece. We need professionals, and that's to my mind it's almost there as a new profession evolving, which is going to include Eric and Rick and Tobias. And so we have people who understand data and risk and well-being, and it all comes together in this sort of integrated new emerging profession. But the critical word is measurement. An RCS at its heart is an organization that measures things. 150 years we've been measuring things. What we need to do now is learn how to measure new things. And that's the challenge. And how do we integrate that with some of the old things we used to measure? So what's the relationship between space and well-being? What's the relationship between risk and value? And how do we measure that and demonstrate that value? Because this isn't a conversation we can sort of say, well, in a few years. This is happening right now. The profession is changing right now. It's going to be all around data. It's going to be all around experience and people. And we have to kind of integrate all of this into a fast-moving, agile, innovative profession, I think. So fantastic opportunity. I mean, IBOS will talk about the RICS Building Operations Standard is an attempt to bring that together into a framework that identifies the data and how it integrates and how it relates. So we will come on to it, I'm sure, but I think it's fast-moving, exciting times.
Well, that's true, and I mean, we do have quite a diverse range of panelists today. So if we will look, so maybe now if we move on to the data and building performance management aspect. So a question for Tobias. So how does one goes about improving the occupier experience with the Internet of Things and the digital twins?
Yeah, and I think it's what the colleagues already said here. It's all about measuring, right? And understanding how the building is behaving, let's say, or how the people are actually behaving in the building. And the digital twin can provide exactly that. And I think Paul said it's about measuring new things. I would say it's not only the new thing, it's also to measure the things that we are measuring things 150 years, but in a better, more accurate, more convenient way, and then to be able to correlate all those data, to have one single source of truth for the data about the building. And there you can get then a lot of insights and also increase the user experience. Just think about making sure that in terms of IoT, there are offerings that your elevator could always be up to date. Yeah? There are predictive maintenance offerings. You could also measure the well-being factor of the people. Yeah? You can measure the space utilization, which space is used how much. I think, Richard, you used the example of a fitness room or something like that in a building. In my experience, this is something people were asking for, and they want to have this. In the end, no one is using it very often. Yeah? That's what I experienced. So this is also something you can then actually measure. And here you can then really understand how people actually behave in the building, what areas, what spaces they prefer. And here digital buildings is the best basis to start building up analytics on that.
And I think an important point, Tobias, sorry to butt in, is we should be talking about all buildings here, and that's important because these principles about how you integrate and how you bring forward measurement, utilization of space can be applied. I think Gina said in her introduction, in schools, in hospitals, as well as the office environment. And it's really important that we at RICS, we have a responsibility to act in the public good. And I think it's recognized now, and this is where the opportunity sits, that buildings do more than contribute financially. They make a hugely important contribution financially, but also they contribute socially and environmentally. And we need to take some of this, amazing good practice that we're seeing and encourage all buildings to really apply and understand how their schools are working, how their hospitals are integrating this. And so I think the context is all buildings.
Fully agree, and it's not only about the type of buildings, but also having several buildings of the same time to be able to benchmarking, because then you can really understand if you have a building that for whatever reason is not performing well in terms of user experience. It's not enough to just look at this single one. So if you then have a broad view of your whole portfolio or market data, then you get real insights, a 360-degree view that you would need to provide the best user experience. Fully agree.
So I would just like to build upon what Tobias and Paul have just commented. So Richard and Eric, so Richard first. So there is a wealth of data that is being collected out there, and is it actually driving strategies, and how do we even translate this information?
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, I think it is very much driving strategies. I mean, the strategies hugely depend on the asset class, depend on the very nature of the company, of the business, the time scale, and the funds available. But what we're seeing very much is that the health of people is now an important element to this. It is the most expensive cost line. People within commercial real estate. So I think how understanding how we can retain talent, how we can reduce absenteeism is an important element, and how that is measured now is coming to the forefront. We see benchmarking a critical and important part to people's reporting now, be it internally and against competitors as well.
Okay, thank you. So Eric, just from a risk and resilient perspective, what's your thought on that question about
Well,
data and driving strategies?
yeah, I would say that the better data you have, the better you can assess the different types of risk. And then you can have more specific data, more accurate data to base as form for your decision-making process when managing the risk. Sometimes you get tons of data from a property. If you have a portfolio, you get even more data. So you can use that to drive your strategies and measure their performance. But you also have to say that the data, is it actual and verified data? So it matches the operational reality in a building. So sometimes there's a gap there, but for sure, all of that data is used to optimize also the risk management strategy. So I think just what we're seeing here is synergies, again, not looking at silos and cross portfolios and cross buildings for the optimization of building performance. So for us, data is perfect in risk management perspective.
Okay, thank you. So moving back to Tobias, sort of a question regarding the IBPDI, so the International Building Performance and Data Initiative. If we can just talk a little bit about the common data model, which is very much the core of it. So why is the common data model needed on a high level, and how could this actually help the occupier?
Yeah, so I think Eric just brought the perfect example, and I already said I would like to comment on that. You have a lot of different buildings, different asset classes, a lot of different data sources out there, and all of those data sources provide the data in a different format. Yeah, and that's why we started the International Building Performance and Data Initiative to harmonize all those data formats, because only if you have data in the same format, harmonized data source, you will be really able to benchmark them in the right way. Yeah? So this is really why we started, why we founded IBPDI with the common data model as its source. And that's just what the name already says. It should be a common data model that enables everybody to use the same basis for their benchmarking, for their building analytics, so that you can also more easily share information between different partners, between different systems. And last but not least, this is maybe a little bit far in the future, if you want to one day apply, let's say, modern technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence on the data, they have to be in one standardized format. Otherwise, you will never get the results you're looking for. And that's why it's so important and that the data are stored in the correct, or not the correct, but in a common format here.
Thank you, Tobias. So talking about standard, a question for Paul. So the International Building Operations Standard, short, also known as IBOS, is a data-led standard. So what does this actually mean?
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, IBOS has been developed, importantly, it's been developed collaboratively. So everyone on the call here has had an opportunity and been very supportive and encouraging of the RICS ambition to create some consistency, as Tobias said, in terms of setting out the way we present IBOS is data-led, people-centric. But what we're trying to do is acknowledge, the complexity of developing a higher performing building. It's not an easy thing to do. That's why you need professionals who are competent and highly skilled in order to deliver that. It's an ambition we would encourage every organization to look at. So our IBOS at its heart is it's a framework that sets out the data that you would need to capture to get a very broad picture of how the building is performing. So we say, what data do you need? We've broken it into 5 simple pillars. So we have compliance, noise, light, heat, etc. We have function, space, user needs, etc. Then we have cost, the most critical pillar in some senses. How do we fund and how do we manage the costs for delivering improvement? That's an important barrier for many people. And then the other pillars would be around sustainability, carbon, wastewater, and then the final pillar is really around experience and how do those pillars connect? And that's the data piece. So You know, if you introduce a new cleaning regime, that may be an FM solution, but there would be a cost attached, but the value would be significantly in terms of well-being, experience, and health. So how do those things relate? So iBoss is a tool that sets out the data you need to capture. The key piece is it helps you ask better questions of your building and of your teams and of your people. Now, the role that Eric and Rich and Tobias play is that they form part of the solution to it, because it would say iBoss helps you ask better questions and understand, and you can measure your performance against the standard, and we're creating a free to use tool that will enable you to do that. And it would say, okay, so we're doing pretty well on this, but we're not really understanding how it's influencing well-being enough. So how would we improve that? And then we would look for the solutions to come from our industry, from the profession, and from other partners. And then the data solutions, you know, and how you embed those. Again, they have to be appropriate for your organization. So it's about developing and understanding business cases based on data and evidence, and being able to measure and improve and measure and improve and constantly keep doing that. So it's an exciting standard. The feedback has been tremendous. Everyone on the panel has been really helpful. I think, as I said, it's a new industry we're talking about. So the people who have been engaged with iBoss are not normally the people that RCS has always talked to. So we've talked to designers and architects and engineers and facilities managers, property firms, tech firms, increasingly valuers. That's an interesting end journey I think we're on. And I think that shows the way the profession is changing. It's early days, but I think I'd encourage everyone to have a look at it.
Thank you, Paul, for the insights. So now if we move on to, a hot topic, sustainability and ESG. So of course, in recent years, we have seen a huge surge in ESG, and there is also the trend of concentrating on the S of ESG. The pandemic has not changed the thinking, but has accelerated it. And at the same time, we're sort of increasingly moving away from single building to an organizational level of portfolio management. So the question for Richard, so health and well-being are increasingly being seen as part of the silent S. So could you elaborate further on this?
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, I think your phrase accelerating is very much the case. We're seeing health, well-being and equity now as the top line theme that serves as the foundation really across an entire reporting structure. And very much these are the next areas for market leadership within ESG. And when we talk about the silent S, we actually talk about the invisible H in ESG, the organization's commitment to health, and how that this is now that important factor and needs to be measured, managed, reported and valued. And it's actually the reporting that's quite difficult on this, because there's no global approach or acceptance as to how we report on health. And we've spent a fair bit of time as a company recently pulling out something called the 12 C's, 12 competencies. It's essentially a guideline to help people on that, which I'm happy to share later. But yeah, it's very much front and center stage right now, and I think rightly so.
Thank you, Richard. So a question for Eric. So people tend to think that risk management is basically focusing on the physical and the management aspect, and then people may not necessarily see sustainability and risk assessment as going hand in hand. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, again, as I started off, risk management is really key for both a good ESG scoring and also when managing your sustainability focus and work. So again, by breaking down the silos in organizations, understanding the operations, and then managing the risk. So if we view risk management as an enabler of the business and take a broader perspective of real estate operations, sustainability, ESG, and focus on the process of managing risks within those areas, could be property risk, people-centric risk on safety and security, or sustainability, environmental risk. So again, risk management as an enabler and a process in an organization will help you set the right priorities, manage the risk. So you need to integrate sustainability, environmental risk management practices, the same as you do with people-centric risk. So we need to see it as an enabler and help us set the priorities in the organization. And also what Richard said here, a bit about how to report the risks in our assets and in our organizations and use that information and create value. And again, we talk about happy buildings, happy people. So if you manage the risk, you will have happy buildings, happy people, or safe buildings and safe people. So again, that is managing the risk for your business objectives.
So sort of follow up from there. So obviously for Richard, Tobias, and Eric as well, you deal with clients with various type of assets or portfolio, and a lot of the time portfolio are not restricted to only one country. When it comes to a one size fits all approach, which sometimes people tend to think would be the solution, it may not be the, how do you say, the best way forward. And so if you would like to comment a little bit about that, maybe we can start with Richard.
Yeah, it is something that we're seeing being quite a challenge. And I work for the EMEA region within our company, so 42 plus countries, goodness knows how many languages, you know, and that is a challenge. And it depends on entities. I think it depends on the ownership. But for example, when we talk about portfolios, and as a result of this, now we've increased our program to enable people to just report on a specific country and dissect into more localized areas.
Okay, that's an interesting insight. So Eric?
Yeah, I would say there is no one size fits all across portfolio. However, you can have standards that is applicable across regions or countries that you need to apply to, and then you add the local legislation in that country. And again, key here is if you know how to manage your risks in that environment or in that country, you can have a baseline standard that you could report to, because what you collect is actually data, and data for me is the same regardless what country you're in. So there are really good ways of today measure performance across portfolios, across countries, and how to manage risk. It's you will have local deviations in terms of local legislation, but to me, asset, shopping center, office asset, a hospitality asset, it's the same regardless what country. There are not that many differences the way of collecting data or making sure it's a safe environment or the well-being of people. It's the same across. There are local deviations based on legislation, but the data you collect, to me, if we give that to Tobias, he could probably disseminate it and put it into a good taxonomy regardless of the country or the type of assets. And I think that's a bit of what you have set up also, Tobias, to use. So for me, you can manage it quite well, even though there are challenges in doing that.
So Tobias, in a very broad sense, it would be like, how can data analytics sort of help in the sustainability movement? And we do have a very, very specific question from one of our listeners. It's about, can you please share some ideas on carbon emission and the machine learning on construction and infrastructure industry?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me first try to answer the first question, and I would fully agree with Eric. The data basis, the data that you need to collect is more or less the same all over the world. There might be some differences. I don't know if you're in a northern country where it's a little bit colder than in southern Spain, you might have some other focus areas, but in the end, the data basis is definitely the same. What we experience, at least at Building Rights, is that it's really, really difficult to come up with one standard for dashboards, for example, for the data analytics. So because all of our customers, they have a slightly different focus, yeah, depending on the business they are doing, depending on the location they're in, the size of the customers, and so on and so forth. So again, fully agree, the data basis should be or is definitely the same. You need to know about your resource consumption, carbon emissions. If we talk about the E, if we talk about S, it's all about the well-being, I don't know, temperature, lighting, and so on and so forth. So this is the same, but again, the focus that different customers on our side have is different, and we try to create actually some standard dashboards that can be given to everyone, but it seems it's much harder than we actually expected. So it's a maximum 80% match as usual in this case. The other question was about the carbon emissions, right? Yeah.
Carbon emission and machine learning, yes, for the construction and infrastructure industry.
Yeah, I have to admit we are not so deep into the construction and infrastructure industry. Nevertheless, I mean, the first thing is, of course, to understand what are your carbon emissions, and there are two different types in the end. You have your embodied carbon and let's say the operational carbon, and bringing all this together and making decisions, especially in the construction. When we talk about the embodied carbon, there it's really difficult to handle all the information that you would need to take into account when you really want to make an exact or a good assumption or a good statement about the carbon emissions you're having. On the one hand, either the embodied or then later the operational ones, and that's maybe where machine learning can really help, that already during the construction or the planning phase, actually, you can better simulate what will be the carbon emissions in the future. Of course, there are tools already around today, but with machine learnings, those results will just become much better and much more precise in the future, and then help maybe a planner to improve already the emission before the building is actually constructed.
I think that piece on carbon is really interesting, and certainly construction and infrastructure, and probably points to the need for better integration between building construction and building use. And I would point people to the RICS International Cost Measurement Standard, which has version 3 has a whole sort of new section relating to carbon measurement, and I think it's that consistency of measurement and a consistent approach to measuring carbon, a commitment to measuring it, and then a consistent way to do it will enable us to then pull that through into the use of space. So it's had a huge impact. It's sort of agenda item number one on almost every RICS leaders forum with very senior people in government, and I think consistent standards is really going to be part of that solution. So RICS is very active around through the ICMS and also developing carbon assessment tools, etc. So I think we're well on the way to having that really critical, consistent standard that measures it.
So just sort of following up from there, so it's a commonly heard trope is that this is yet another standard, and there's just so many standards out there. So Tobias, the common data model has integrated some of these international standards that I mentioned, such as the property measurement standard, DIN, so you do have national standards that are embedded in it, IBOS as well. So what makes it different?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you already said. So we are not looking to create yet another standard because the industry has enough standards globally. So what we are actually doing, the CDM or the IBPDI data model is set up with different clusters. There are clusters for example, the financials, project management, organizational management, but also along the building and portfolio life cycle, the investment management, construction, transaction management, up to the facility management, and also user and customer experience. And in the end, what we are doing is that as soon as we start working on a cluster, there are different working groups out there, we look into the market, what is already existing, and we're trying to take what is there. As already said, in the area of user and customer experience is a little bit more difficult than maybe in other areas about the financials or the facility management. Nevertheless, we want to create this one standard, which is maybe only covering 80% of the needs, but the nature of the common data model is that everybody can extend it as they need it. But in the end, we have the same basis, and we are able to integrate or to work together or exchange data with the majority of the existing standards in the different fields. And I think this is what is a little bit outstanding here towards all the other standard or standards initiatives that are out there. And we are working very closely with RICS. So we are also currently mapping our data model to IBOS. That is happening at the moment. So yeah, I think this would make it special a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Tobias. So sort of moving back the conversation about buildings. So it is easier to imagine that for newer buildings, it's easier to sort of adapt it towards well-being, sustainability, and putting the occupier at the heart of the assets. But then what about old buildings? And as you know, in Europe as well, we do have a lot of old heritage building. So would it be actually possible to retrofit such buildings to meet emerging needs? And is it actually as onerous as it sounds? Richard, your thoughts?
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, I've been thinking, we think about this a lot when we're talking to clients, new build versus retrofitting. And when it comes to health and well-being, we're seeing that really the cost for a new build is about 1% of overall cost to engage with the well requirements. But retrofitting is significantly less than that, and maybe even half that. So I think it really does depend. And we've got a few case studies, and the Crown Estate have got their heritage building on Regent Street to well platinum level, and that was retrofitted, and they did that relatively easy. So on the surface, it can look quite potentially daunting, but actually the reality we're seeing it's not so problematic.
Thank you, Richard. So, Eric, just from a risk and resilience point of view, and sort of integrating, or like, how do you say, like integrating new measures to sort of fit into, let's say, older buildings to fit into emerging needs as well. From a risk and resilience point of view, is there a difference between, the assets that are older or newer?
When it comes to technology and building standards, there will be, especially if you need to invest into infrastructure of the old building, there might be retrofits that will drive the cost part of that. But again, if you know what you measure and you set the clear objectives, what you want to achieve, and again, just try to set up a process for managing the risk to reach those objectives, I think you can be quite efficient. And when it comes to maybe well-being or safe kind of practices, sometimes it's a lot about the process and procedures you set up and just collecting the data also to learn how to measure that. Once you have that in place, you can start working with the performance and optimization. But if you don't have any data, if you don't have any good structures, it will be hard to increase the performance and really see what the cost is. So again, setting up the objectives, manage those risks, and then I think you can be quite efficient and also cost saving.
Thank you, Eric. So for Tobias, I mean, I believe that in our previous conversations, you sort of mentioned that for older buildings, you use technologies such as sensors to sort of, bring older buildings to sort of like the modern approach of putting the user experience as a forefront in terms of the building's performance. Could you maybe, share some of the examples that you know of?
Yeah, of course. Very happy to do that. Maybe just one comment to the previous question. I think we have no other choice than to retrofit all the buildings instead of building new ones. That's just not possible. And we know that around, I think, 80% of the buildings that will be around in 2050, where we have, according to Paris, to the agreement, we want to reach the neutral carbon neutrality. 80% of the buildings are already existing today, so we have to act on those buildings. And yeah, technology is here the answer. Yeah, sensors can help a lot. We have one project with our investors of Building Minds here in Berlin, where we equipped a whole building where around 500 people are working. We equipped every single desk with an occupancy sensor. We equipped sensors for temperature, light, CO2 level, noise, humidity. And yeah, we are really now people are coming back to the office, are starting to understand how these things impacting the way how people act with a building, and yeah, to analyze where maybe areas are used more popular or less popular, and then you can yeah, see this together with those well-being KPIs, let's say, to understand how the building is working. And it's actually not that expensive. I think this whole building was around 80,000 euros to equip, as I said, more than 400 or 500 desks, and to yeah, put all the other sensors and bringing all the data from the other systems that were in the building, for example, from the elevators, from the entrance system, all together in one system, and be able to analyze them then.
Thank you, Tobias. So a question for Richard and Paul here. So, sort of like the whole conversation today is really talking about putting the people first, or like a people-centric approach to buildings, well-being, health as well. So there is indeed a paradigm shift in terms of people's mindset as well. Does this give a competitive edge for commercial properties? Richard?
Yeah, I think it does. Investing in your people, giving them the best opportunity to drive return on investment is it's not something new, but I think the last 18 months to 2 years has meant that this has become acutely more important. So yes, I think so.
I think it's about articulating quite complex data analytics simply. That's one of the challenges we have. So collecting lots of data, is helpful for people who are data analysts. How do we communicate and create business cases to develop property strategy simply? And again, IBOS is a lens through which you can say, well, we've got cost compliance, they're connected, and I think that's the challenge is complete. And obviously it's about putting the people at the heart of it, but also being able to communicate to an HR executive, communicate to a finance executive and say, this data will help you make better decisions about the building based on your organizational imperatives. It's your organization. If you're a university or a school or a hospital or an office, you need the information to make the right decisions. Cost will always be a factor, and therefore we need that information. Increasingly, it's how will this impact our people? How does it affect our return to work? How do we recruit staff? How does it impact brand value? They're all building-led conversations that we have to have based on evidence and data, because that's the critical thing. I think the challenge is creating and using this data well and effectively, and really articulating business cases to senior leaders in a way that they can understand that it's not a binary conversation. It's not right, we'll just improve the sustainability and everything else will be fine. That there would be a knock-on in terms of other things you may affect unwittingly, or you might improve this but affect that. So I think it's that complexity that we need to use data and somehow make it engaging to people who make decisions through developing really solid business cases.
Thank you, Paul. So a question for Eric then. So obviously with the Safe Asset Group, you cover a wide range of assets. So, from the logistics side of things to shopping malls as well as other type of commercial properties as well. So do you see this trend also reflected in let's say among the properties that you cover?
Absolutely, it's a commercial or competitive edge for all commercial properties, as you said, shopping center, hospitality asset, office asset, because it's all about being people-centric. And the theme here for today, it's about happy buildings, happy people. And I think if you utilize data, if you utilize standards, and you measure the performance and you manage the risk, you will end up with well-performing assets, well-performing people, and that will ultimately give you a value on both the property and both on the operations, and the way you can measure things, and then you can optimize the performance. And again, risk management and the different standards, that is giving you best practice and driving the value of your organization and property forward. So definitely competitive edge for commercial properties.
Thank you, Eric. So sort of moving away from the property to the human side of things. So, earlier in our discussion, we talked about, the changing role of property, the need to use data in a better way to optimize performance of building and so on. And obviously the profession needs to change and evolve as well. So, given that each of you panelists come from, sort of different background, any kind of advice that you could give to the young profession out there? One of the questions that we have is that, I'm a well or lead green associate, and obviously I need to practice what I'm learning. And so what do I need to learn? Like, what do I need to do to sort of improve on the professionalism? So maybe we can start with Tobias.
Yes, thank you. And of course, I'm looking in the direction of data here, and I think Paul mentioned this briefly, just that he said what is important is that you learn how to use data actually, because it's not so simple, right? You can have a lot of data, but if you do not apply the right measures on those data, or if you do wrong analytics, then you could also derive the wrong decisions from them, and this could then also be quite dangerous. So here it's all about understanding how to deal with data, collect data, and then really how to do the right data analytics. I think this is something what is really, really important in the future, and not only for the professional data analyst, but for everyone, because data, I mean, it's an old saying, but data is the new oil. It's still the new oil, and therefore everybody has to deal with them in the future more and more.
Thank you, Tobias. So Richard, any words of advice for the professionals in the built environment?
Yeah, I think really understanding, making sure, always going back on a project, always going back to what the client is asking, what their goals, what their strategies may be, and focusing 100% on trying to deliver those as best you can. And I think with that, with the experience that will come, case studies will form. And as Eric and Tobias and Paul have all touched on today, it is only through the experience, it's only through gathering the data. And because if we talk about ESG, it's all quite, and the S part is all quite new and unknown as to how we report. So we're all learning, and it's just that journey.
Thank you, Richard. So Paul, our RICS members come from all pathways. So what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I was just thinking, listening. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's because I think I said at the beginning, it's a sort of a new profession almost emerging. And when we talk to young people, and you say, set aside this profession, say what's important to you as a young person, what are you interested in? And the things they're interested in are the things we're talking about on this call today. They're interested in technology, and they're interested in sort of the data, and they're also really interested in people and the planet and those sorts of things. And then when you add property and real estate in the built environment and say there's a profession there, it becomes really interesting to them, because I think sometimes the profession has been misunderstood in terms of what it does and the role it plays. So I think the role the profession plays in terms of solving some of the problems that we have is really, really critical. So that's a great place to start. And then how do we then ensure that we deliver it? I think the people on the call and people who work in real estate are very practical people. Eric and Richard and Tobias are all about doing things and solving problems. So we have that. So we then kind of have to put the two things together and take all that sort of interest and intent and apply it and deliver it and solve it. It's our industry that's responsible for fixing some of these problems. So creating these high performing buildings that are sustainable, creating buildings that are providing all this great well-being and experience. And so I think we're going to be attractive and appealing because we cover the right areas. We're going to be successful by demonstrating the value. That's what Richard's talking about, the case studies and the evidence, which is why we need the evidence. And that's why we need to measure it and be able to demonstrate it. So, I think we are incredibly important as a profession in terms of everything that everybody on this call is doing. And the work we're doing is incredible. I've seen so many great things, and we can apply that in any building. It's really important. I know I keep talking about schools, but we send our children into schools every single day. And are those environments, enabling our children to do the best they can do and be safe and productive, etc. And it's absolutely critical. So I think that's the way we position the profession to attract the right people in. It's a new skill set, and then let's make sure we create the standards and that enable them to deliver it. It's really important.
Thank you, Paul. So last but not least, Eric. So earlier, in this whole discussion as well, you have demonstrated that, risk and resilience need to be seen as in a holistic approach as well.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, like what would be your, words of wisdom, basically?
Wow, words of wisdom, always good to share. No, but really, what we say, what we see now, and what we really learn is like this panel, a collaborative approach. That means internally in your organization, break down the silos, don't work individually, use a collaborative approach, be curious, build value in whatever you're delivering to your organization, and again, manage the risk. And the good thing about risk management is you really need to have a collaborative approach. You need to be curious and ask the right questions, and you need to work across the silos. If you do that, you will learn so much, you will get all the knowledge you need to optimize the performance and drive the value of your organization and the asset and the people around you. And that will deliver happy buildings and happy people. So for me, that's the word of wisdom from Sweden today.
Thank you. And just before we finish the discussion, so one last question, and then we will have to bear in mind the time. So this would be a question from Beiruz Emami. So about 30 years ago, so while studying in my third year at the AA School of Architecture, we were given the Central Point building to change it into an environmental, people-friendly, live workspace. And after all this time, we're now talking about this type of buildings. Who will carry the flag? So this is an open question. So who would like to take it?
We'll give it to you, Paul.
I think Centre Point's been redeveloped. Well, I know Centre Point's been redeveloped. I'm sure the question knows that, and that was developed in, as Eric says, in a completely integrated way, actually, because I've met the developer, and we work with the local authority and the government to produce funding to create a new development, which is a very people-centric building. So it's a great example. And if you look at the solutions they've embedded in there, they're very much around measuring the experience based on data, etc. It took a long time to do that, and I don't think we have that luxury of time. But that integrated profession that we're talking about, in terms of people collaborating, innovating is a critical thing, and leading things. Those are sort of things we need to see to have more developments like that. Which Centre Point is a great place to go now. Didn't used to be.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. So this will bring us towards the end of the webinar. And I would like to once again thank the panel for the engaging discussion that we have today. So here you would see a few of our next webinars, which we will invite the audience to register for. And once again, today's webinar is brought to you in cooperation with our lead tech partner, A-Site. And if you enjoy this session, and if you would like to know more about the trends, opportunity, and challenges facing the World Built Environment Forum, or if you would like to join the discussion with your own opinion and work, so we would love for you to join the WebF community. And if you like more information on any of this and more of what the WebF forum has to offer, I invite you to download the WebF app from the App Store. And so this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for listening, and please stay on for the single question survey on how you found the past hour. And I look forward to you joining us the next time. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for your time.
Thank
All
you.
right. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.